Hello, everybody, and welcome to Installfest for WSL, i.e. Installfest for Windows. So if you're on a Windows computer and you are attending Code Platoon, we're going to help you get your environment set up. And there's a couple steps to that. But the first one is this thing called WSL, which stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. So just to show you what that looks like, I can open Chrome here. Don't worry about this. If I type in WSL, well, the second thing that comes up is install WSL here. So essentially, if you're on Windows, to make your development environment like a Mac or like Linux, to make it basically the same as everyone else's, the modern solution is what's called WSL, which basically means you're going to install a Linux operating system within your Windows operating system. So how do we do that? Well, first we're going to want to open up a command prompt or PowerShell. I think I'm going to go with PowerShell and open it in administrator mode. So what I'm going to do, and these are both already installed on your Windows device, so I'm going to hit the Windows key, which brings up this, and I'm going to start typing PowerShell. So a couple things come up. I'm just going to take this first one, and then importantly, I'm going to right-click here. Oh, actually, I don't need to right-click. I see right over here, it says Run as Administrator. That's what I want. So I'm going to left-click there. And I had to click Yes because it asked me about some permissions, but cool. We're here now, and we probably don't understand what this means, but that's okay. I don't personally know much about PowerShell, but we can type this into PowerShell, and it will begin the process of downloading WSL. So I'm going to do that, WSL-install, hit enter. So as you see, it says installing some virtual machine platform, installing Windows Subsystem for Linux. So this was probably going to take a while. And of course, we might fast forward through this when we put this on YouTube. But let's see what happens. So you see it said that it installed Windows Subsystem for Linux, but now it's installing Ubuntu. So basically, WSL is a way of running some flavor of Linux within your Windows, and the default it chooses is Ubuntu, which is a popular flavor of Linux. And that's what we go with, the default. Okay, so it appears to be saying that everything was successful. I'm surprised it happened as quickly as it is, but we're not actually done until we reboot the system. So I'm going to end this video now, and I'm going to reboot my system, i.e. I'm going to turn it off and turn it back on, or do something like this, Windows restart, so power restart. So I'm going to restart my system, and when I come back, I'll start recording again. Okay, welcome back. As you can see on my screen, this pops up immediately after you reboot your computer after installing WSL. It's really important that you see this screen and you don't dismiss it. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in a weird situation. So as you can see, it's saying that Ubuntu is installed. We're launching it. And because this is our first time using Ubuntu, it wants us to create a UNIX user account. So it's telling us it doesn't need to be the same as our Windows user account, and that's going to be true for the password as well. So I'm just going to make up a username. This is one I like to use a lot. Basically, just use characters. Some special characters will work, but just do it until you get something right, and lowercase characters will always work, so that works. I hit enter, and now I am waiting. It's probably going to prompt me for a password in a second. There we go. So it wants a password. Your password can be any password, but I would recommend you choose something relatively simple, all lowercase letters maybe, which is obviously not great for security, but you're going to be typing this in relatively regularly because that is sometimes necessary. So you don't want it to be a password that's hard to remember, and as you'll see when I start typing, when you're typing something into a Linux-like environment, like Ubuntu, it will not show you anything as you type. So it's very hard to tell if backspaces work or anything like that. So you really want something you can just get right easily. So I'm typing something in right now and I hit enter and it wants me to retype it. And that's good. Yeah, so it says good password and it was installed successfully. And I think I'm going to wait another second. There we go. Yeah, so without looking into that too much, see, I'm going to write clear right now, and that should clear the screen. If we look up here, it's actually telling us some information. It's telling us that I am currently logged into Ubuntu as the user Aloof Buddha, which is the username I just created. And this @pyroclastic is just what I named my computer. So when you originally got your computer, you were forced to name it. I don't believe you can change the name of a Windows computer after it's created, but that's just going to represent the computer you're on, and usually you won't care about that. But that's what that is. And then you'll see this colon and then a little squiggle here. That squiggle means where you are, and squiggle means the home directory. And then finally, there's the $sign here, which means everything after this is something I type. So for example, if I typed print working directory and I hit enter, that's going to tell me where I am, and that is my home directory according to Linux. Cool. So, the first thing I want to do now is let's get a better terminal. So as you can see right in here, we're in a command prompt, I believe, and I can close that. And then if I hit the Windows key and I start typing Ubuntu, you'll see we have an app now called Ubuntu, and I can open that. And this brings up the same terminal. So I could always do this, but there's actually a better solution for this now. If I go to the Windows Store, don't worry, you're not going to have to buy anything. I'm going to go to the Windows Store. Wait a few seconds. Great. So I'm going to type in here terminal. And something comes up called Windows Terminal. So Windows Terminal is a terminal that Windows made themselves, and it's really nice, and it gives us lots of the features we want. So I'm going to, oh, it looks like I already have it installed somehow. I'm really not sure, because I just blanked out this computer, so I would be surprised. But let me click open here. Okay, there it goes. There's my Windows PowerShell. Oh, I see, that's what it was using before. Well, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pin this to the taskbar because I want this to be my shell for now on. And the shell is how you, or the terminal rather, is how you interact with command line stuff. And so as you see, it originally opened PowerShell here, but I can click here, for example, I can click plus. Well, that's just gonna give me another PowerShell. But I could click this arrow here, and I could say, oh, actually, I want Ubuntu. And now I'm in Ubuntu. If I wait a second, right, there we go. And now I could say like ls or, echo hello. That's a simple command. It's going to print out hello. But I want to make sure that it does this, that it opens Ubuntu every time. So look, if I close it and I reopen it, it's back in PowerShell. So what I want to do is go into settings here. And it's going to say default profile, and I'm going to select this first Ubuntu. I've seen this before where sometimes there's two, one with the Ubuntu symbol, one with the general Linux symbol, which is a penguin, but I'm going to choose this first one with the Ubuntu symbol. And then default terminal application, we're going to say Windows Terminal. And then I'll click Save. And that's all I'm going to do for now. Close all the tabs. And now when I reopen it, if I wait, you can already see it's in Ubuntu, but great, that works for me. So what else is there to do? I'm looking at my other computer right now to see the steps. So we've installed Windows Subsystem for Linux, but there's probably a few more things we want to do. One of them I'm going to say is package management. Okay, so because we're in Ubuntu, we're going to use this package manager called apt-get, or just apt. And apt is Ubuntu's built-in way of essentially downloading packages, downloading files, downloading programs that you don't already have on your computer, but you might want. So just like the Windows Store is a graphical user interface for downloading programs you don't already own, that's what apt is for Ubuntu. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type, I could type something like apt, and if I hit tab, you'll see it'll start to autocomplete. So there's a bunch of things, and I can type apt get, and then if I hit tab, it might tell me a little bit more. Tab is generally autocomplete for a terminal environment. And the first thing I want to do is update the list. I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see it says permission denied. Okay, so what is that? Well, remember when we made that password? The nature of Linux is that it doesn't just give you permission by default to access anything on the file system. Really, you can only access things that are within your home folder, which is the squiggle, which is /user/aloof Buddha here, or /home/aloof Buddha rather. But these files up here, it's saying it's trying to change something that starts at /, and that means it's trying to change something at the root level. We don't have access to that. So the way we get access to that is with this command called sudo. Sudo can come before a command, and it will prompt you for your password. And if you are allowed to, and we are allowed to, and the password is correct, we can now do this thing that requires root access. I'm going to say apt get update. And it wants my password, so I'll type that in. And now it's downloading, now it's running this command. So what this is actually doing, apt-get update, is the first thing it's doing is going to some server that has the list of all programs or files that apt knows about, and it's updating the local list so that we can then search for things we want. And sometimes this takes a little while because if it's never been run before, there's all sorts of things that it needs to download, which is just basically the library of things you could possibly download. It's not actually downloading those things, it's just downloading a list of the things so that you can search them. So we're going to wait a minute. Great, there we go. So now I should be able to type some more, and what I'm going to type now is sudo apt-get install. And I wanted to install a couple things, so I could type something like Python 3, enter. What is this telling me? It's telling me that that is actually already installed. I guess that comes by default in Ubuntu now. And the way I can test that it works is I can type Python 3, and I hit enter, and you see something come up, and if I type like 1 + 1, it's able to compute that. So now I want to exit out of this. I'm actually going to type Control-C. And that isn't enough, so I'm going to type Control-D, and now I'm out of it. We will talk more about that in the first lecture. That's called an interrupt. It lets you exit out of some running program. But actually, there's two more things I want to download. So right now I'm hitting up and down on my keyboard, which in a command line environment is going to give you your previous commands. So I installed Python 3, but there's actually more things I want to install. Like I want to install something called Python 3-pip. And you can actually install more than one thing at a time like this. So if I type something like this, it's actually going to grab both of these packages, which are both necessary for what we want to do with Python. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to take a minute. Sometimes it'll ask you yes or no. So you just say yes. You're not expected to generally read all this. I don't understand most of what it says either, but essentially to download any given package, there might be packages that package relies on, and packages that package relies on. And so what this is doing is essentially, in attempting to download Python 3-pip, it's downloading all the dependencies for Python 3-pip and all the dependencies for those dependencies, and that can often take a fair bit of time. But luckily, you only have to do it once every time you download a new program. Okay, there we go. So I'm not going to worry about the output too much. I'm going to type clear. That gets me my screen back. And if I just type pip and hit tab, it's showing me some stuff. So I basically just want to see that this works. There's a couple versions of it that sometimes happens, but I think pip 3 is what we want. And I'm just going to hit enter there. And okay, the fact that it shows me anything, so I'm not actually doing anything with it, but the fact that it's showing me anything and not saying something like, if I just type some random characters, it'll say command not found. But the fact that it's not saying command not found means it knows about this command. So we're good on that front. And the next thing we want to do, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but we want to set up what's called a virtual environment for Python. So just like Ubuntu, you download packages. In Python, sometimes you download code that you didn't write yourself. You download some library someone else wrote that is useful for you. So like Django, for example, is going to be one of those libraries. And pip is, just like apt is the package manager for Ubuntu, pip is the package manager for Python. But in order for it to work, you have to set up what's called a virtual environment. So what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is, well, actually, we have to install one more thing. So I'm going to say sudo apt get install Python 3.10-venv. And venv stands for virtual environment. So we're just going to do that. Yes. This should take a little less long. There we go. And now I should be able to type Python 3-m venv, and I'm just going to call it default. And notice I'm in my home directory now, so that's where it's going to create this file. So I hit enter. Looks like nothing happens, but I hit clear, I type ls, and you'll see there's actually this thing called default in there now. So I'm actually going to go into default. And in default, there's something called bin, and in bin, there's there's a bunch of stuff here, including this thing called activate, which is a program you can run. So I'm going to go back to my home directory, and we'll explain all this that I'm doing later. But in order to activate my Python environment, I type source, and then I go to that activate file. So in this case, from where I am, it's default /bin/activate. And I think that's all I want. And now you'll see that it says default there on the left. So that's how you do that. But notice that I'm going to close my terminal and open it back up. And that isn't there anymore. So in a bit, we're going to take care of making sure it's always there. But there's a few more things to do. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is install some more things that we need. So we need Node. Node is a way of running JavaScript, not in a browser environment, but in an operating system environment. So we're going to do that like this. First, we're going to install something called npm. npm stands for Node Package Manager. It's the equivalent of pip for Python or apt for Ubuntu. It's a package manager for JavaScript, essentially. And it wants my password. And I'll type yes. Again, this might take a minute. Okay, great. So I think we are good now. We have npm installed, and I can check because if I type npm, it knows about it. So now what I'm going to type is sudo npm install -g. -g just means global here, n. So n is actually the name of a program. I'm downloading a program called n from npm. And that happened really quickly. And so now if I type n, it should know about that. And it does know about something. And you can see here, I mean, if I read this, it's telling me there's no downloaded version yet, right? So n is a program that lets you manage different versions of Node. We just want the basic version. So I'm going to say sudo n stable, and that'll download the latest, what they call stable version of Node, meaning it's not experimental. This is the official version of Node. So if I type Node now, I can see Node. I'm on version 18.16, and that works. And now I'm exiting out of it. Cool. So we have Node working as well. That feels good. And some of these things are previously installed. Like you might have noticed there, it was telling me that I actually did have a version of Node already. Just this is a newer version. But if I type Git, looks like I already have Git on this computer. So if this is the case, you can just move on. You're fine. But if you want to be really careful about it, you can say sudo apt-get install Git, and that will install a version of Git. This one's actually saying, hey, you already have the latest version. I didn't install anything. So now we have Git as well. And while we're here, we're just going to configure some basic Git stuff. So to do that, I'll say git config -- global user.name. And then I give it my actual name that I want to be associated with, I guess, my whenever Git does things on my behalf. So I have a name like that now. And I'm going to type up because I'm going to change this ever so slightly. And I'm going to say, okay, same deal, but for the email, what email do you want to use? And in this case, I'll use my code Platoon email, but obviously you use whatever email you want to use. Okay. And we haven't downloaded Visual Studio Code yet, so I wonder if this will work. But the next thing I'm going to type is git config -- global core.editor, and then the word code. So I think that's not going to quite work yet because we don't have that program yet, but we're going to get that program soon, and hopefully everything will work. And then if I want to see what Git thinks based on everything I just wrote, I could say global like this -l, and it's just telling me that I typed some information, and that's what it thinks. Cool. So the next thing here I want to do is this. Well, this may be optional. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a browser, and I'm going to go to GitHub. Just go to GitHub itself, and I'm going to sign in. And I guess that's me. So it signed me in. Just want to find something simple we can download. What if I said Lodash or something? That's a particular library that people like with JavaScript. So I'm just doing this to show if I can use Git correctly. So here, if I hit code, and you might not see that unless you have it full screen, so do that. But there's a couple options here for how to download something from GitHub. And so I'm going to take this first one here, HTTPS, and I'm going to hit this button to copy it. And then going back to my terminal, this is where I am. I'm going to say git clone, and then I'm going to paste that in there. And if this works, it's going to copy that whole library locally to the file I'm in. So I'm going to hit enter. And even if just that we're seeing this means that it's working. So we'll just wait a second. So you don't really need to understand what this means, but it means it's downloading some stuff. And then now you see there's a file called Lodash. I can go into Lodash and I can look at it. There's a heck of a lot in there because it's a big library. And I'm going to go back up and I'm going to remove it because I don't actually need it. And as you see, it's not there anymore. But there's an alternative way to interact with GitHub that I think is worth mentioning. So I can type sudo apt-get install gh. And that's just another package that exists. GH is a command line program specifically for interacting with GitHub. So we have it here now. And the first thing I'm going to do is type git gh auth login. And it's going to ask me some questions. I'm going to go with regular GitHub. I'm going to go with HTTPS. It says authenticate with your GitHub credentials. So I'll say yes. Log in with a web browser, enter. So it wants me to copy this thing here, and I'll do my best to copy it. Then I'll hit enter. So this looks like it's broken. It's not. This is just because Ubuntu doesn't understand how to open this link. Oops. But I can still, I think if I hit control and I click on this link, there we go. So I hit control and I clicked on the link. And now I'm just going to look at these side by side. And I'm going to type in that code, 1F66 ECF5. And this is to confirm for GitHub that I'm who I say I am because I'm logged in. So I'm going to authorize this. It says I'm all set. Your device is now connected. I can close this. And now it says authentication complete. Hit enter to continue. So I hit enter. And that is great. And now we're just going to show you that if I wanted to, I could go back here and I could say, okay, not HTTPS, but GitHub CLI. I'm going to copy that. And now from here, if I paste that in, that's a command that will download GitHub, and it already knows about me in terms of authentication. That's the main reason to use GH over git clone. Sometimes you have authentication issues without it. So I'm gonna hit enter and it's gonna do everything it did before. So we're just gonna wait a moment. Great, and once again, we have Lodash here now. We have everything in it. And that was just to demonstrate how you work with GitHub repos. So cool, we have that working. And what else is there left to do? Well, one thing we haven't done yet that I want to do. So we have WSL, we have our package manager set up, we have Git set up, we have Python, we have Node. But something we haven't done yet, actually, we have our terminal in terms of Windows terminal. Something we haven't done yet is Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is a code editor, and let's just search for it. Visual Studio Code. So I'll click here, and it knows I'm on Windows, so it's going to download it. It shouldn't take too long. There we go. It looks like it's already done. And now I'll run it. Did I successfully run it? Let me check. If I go to downloads and I double click, now it's actually running okay. So I accept the agreement without reading it, of course. And it tells me it's going to download it somewhere, and I'm cool with that. So call it Visual Studio Code. I don't really care too much about this. You can decide on this stuff, but you importantly want to add it to the path. That's the main one. That's already selected, so we'll install it. Great, and now we're going to launch Visual Studio Code. So, cool. So this is Visual Studio Code. I'm going to close this. As you can see, it's a place where you can open folders. You can make a new file. If you hit Control tilde, tilde is the thing right below your escape that looks like a squiggly. If you hit Control tilde, you'll see this prompt here, which you'll see is PowerShell, which is not what we want, but as you see, you can have an internal prompt. We're going to close this for now. And what's the next thing we want to do? You'll see if I open something like command prompt and I typed code from here, that's able to open Visual Studio Code because Visual Studio Code is installed in Windows and it's on the path, as they say, which means that Windows knows about it. And yet, we want to do things from Ubuntu. So how do we do that? Well, we'll go here to this, this thing that looks like a bunch of blocks with one block coming off, and we click there, extensions, and we're going to search WSL. There we go. So the fact that it's made by Microsoft tells you it's a good one. 19 million people downloaded it, all these good stars. Good to look at that sometimes to make sure it's what you want. So we're going to install that. And I think that is maybe all I need to do right now. So how does this work? First, I'm going to close this, and then I'll close this as well. Sometimes it's good to close and reopen your terminal when you change something. And now if I type code, what happens? Okay, it actually knows about it in Ubuntu, and it starts installing some stuff. Boom. So what's important is that in the future, when you're opening Visual Studio Code, if you're on Windows, you don't really want to do it from Windows. You want to do it from the command prompt, and the reason is because Windows and Ubuntu are basically two separate environments, and WSL is going to, or sorry, Visual Studio Code is going to treat them differently depending on which one you're on. And if I click down there, it's going to say connect to WSL. So that's how it knows I'm on WSL. So you see down here now it says WSL Ubuntu. That usually happens by default. Probably didn't because this is the first time. Great, so we're on WSL, and now I know that if I'm in here, I can type code, and it will open Visual Studio Code. And as you see, it's doing it automatically now. It knows we're on WSL Ubuntu, so it's going to be aware of certain things. And if I hit Control tilde, you'll see by default it's doing bash here, which I think is fine. Bash is just a kind of shell. There's a couple different kinds of shell. Bash is the default. But importantly, you see my UNIX name, and this is like my UNIX environment now. If I type ls here, we're going to see default like before, so that's really good. Okay, so just looking through my list now, we have our terminal, we have Visual Studio Code, and we're able to type code. We have WSL installed, we did our package management stuff, we got Python, we got Node, we have Git set up as well as GH for working with GitHub. So the next thing we want to do is what's called aliases. So if I type ls-a, that's going to show me all the files in this folder, including the hidden files. And when I do that, you'll see there's a couple hidden files. If it starts with a dot, it means it's a hidden file. So what this is telling me essentially is that I'm on bash. And there's a couple different shells. We might explore that later, what it might be like to try out a different shell. But assuming we're on bash right now, you'll notice that there's something here called .bashrc. So on this system, it's called .bashrc. Sometimes it's called .bash_profile. So the name's sometimes different depending on your environment, but the basic point is this is a file that runs automatically whenever the shell opens. So I want to open it, and I'm going to go do it like this, code.bashrc. And Visual Studio Code might ask me things about like, is this a trusted file? Generally, you're just going to say yes. And then I'll close this. And you'll see there's a bunch of stuff in here, and you probably won't understand it. Bash is its own language, and we don't expect you to understand it, but we're just going to scroll all the way to the bottom. This is just stuff they gave us by default. A lot of it is to make sure the screen is colored. These hashes are comments, so they're just explaining what it does. But here at the bottom, we can start adding our own things. And what are the things we want to add? Well, the first thing I could see is that if I type Python, it doesn't know about that. It knows about Python 3, but it doesn't know about Python, and maybe we want it to. So if I typed which Python 3, it's going to tell me a specific location, and as it turns out, that location is on the path, which is why it knows about it. But something I could do here now is I can, I'm just going to make a comment to say what I'm doing, and then I could use this term alias, and alias lets me make a new name for something that already has a name. So I'm going to say Python 3. If I type Python, I mean Python 3. And if I say pip, I mean pip 3. And one final thing I want to do is that if you're going to be working with Python a lot, you often want to have a default virtual environment, and we have none right now. So we did that thing before where we had that default there. And if I do, source default bin activate, now we have that. But of course, if we close it and reopen it, it's gone. But of course, this file here is one that will always run whenever you start up a new shell or a new terminal. So what I'm going to write here is source, and I want it to run default. I'm going to put this in like this, I think. I'm going to say default / bin / activate. But I think there's one more thing I have to do, which is it doesn't know which directory you're in, and it's going to assume the root. So I need to know if there's something, like if I were to say print working directory, this is where I am right now. And then I'm going to say echo, and then I'm going to type in this $, which means like a variable in the world of Linux. So, and I'm going to say home, and I'll see it's the same thing. So what this is telling me is that I can come back here, and I believe I can say home / default / bin / activate. I believe I could actually get rid of those quotes, and then I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to close all of this, and I'm going to close this, and now I'm going to reopen this. So now you see when I reopen it, it says default. It knows about the default virtual environment. And if I were to type Python, now it knows about it. And if I were to type which Python, it says that's actually, well, I think it's the same thing. Yeah. So basically, it's pointing to the same thing, I believe. I'm semi-confused by that, but if I type which pip, so that was setting up our aliases. What else is there to do? Looking through this now, one thing we want to do is set up Postgres. So Postgres is a database we're going to use eventually. We're not going to use it right away, but still it's good to set it up early on. So we're going to be back to sudo apt-get install. We're going to do a few things at once. PostgreSQL, PostgreSQL-contrib. Not really sure what that is, but we'll hit enter. Wants my password. And it's going to download some more stuff. Great, so it did it. So now we're going to type sudo service PostgreSQL start. And that should have started a PostgreSQL server in the background. Obviously, we didn't see anything change. So now to enter this PostgreSQL server, this instance, I'm going to type this, which is sudo -i-u Postgres. So what you'll see here is this actually changed me to a new user. I used to be aloof Buddha. Now I'm a user called Postgres, and we're not seeing that default anymore because we're in a new environment now. We're a new user. So now that we're here, just going to clear my screen a little. Now that we're here, I can type PSQL. And now we're actually in a Postgres environment. And as long as you see this, it means you have a working Postgres environment. And like everything else in programming, it's got its own little rules. So this is how you exit out of Postgres. Just /Q, I think that's a /. And now we're back here. And I wonder how you can get back to your original thing. I think if you do Control-D, yeah, that works. So it's a little confusing, but essentially, when you did the Postgres stuff, you created a shell within the original shell you were in. But something you could always do is simply close the terminal and open up a new terminal, and you'll be back to the initial thing. Cool. Okay, so I think there's only one thing left to do, and that's to finish setting up Visual Studio Code. So from here, we could already say code. And remember, because you're on WSL, you generally want to do it from here, because this way it's going to be aware of WSL. And you know that it's dealing with WSL because it looks like this. Whereas if I were to say visual, if we're just going to go into Windows and do it, we're opening up a new window, but it doesn't know about WSL. It's able to connect to it, but it's not by default connected to it. Okay, so we're here in WSL, and we just want to check that certain things work. So let's say I'm here in WSL, and maybe I'll close this first. I can say something like, okay, this is where I am, this is all there is, and I'll say code example.py. And what that's going to do is open up Visual Studio Code with a file called example.py that is not yet saved. And the first thing it's going to do is say, hey, do you want to install some Python stuff? And you say yes. So it's going to go to the extensions and it's going to start installing some Python stuff. Okay, looks good. And I think I do want to click this thing up here just to say yes, trust, otherwise we might have some issues. Cool, and I can come back here. I guess I don't need to look at this right now, but I have this example.py. Notice that if I type here right now, ls, it's not there yet. But if I hit save and I type ls again, yes, it is there. And we just want to see that this works. So I'm just going to write print hello, which is standard Python. And now from here, if I were to say Python example.py, it's printing hello. So I feel good that that works. So we just want to check we could do the same for Node. So if I say code example.js, I'm going to say console.log 1 + 1, let's say. Be really nice to figure this out so it trusts stuff every time. That seems to be an issue. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to close this. And now once again, if I type node example.js, we see something. So I feel pretty good that this stuff is working. What haven't we seen yet? Okay, one thing, if I open up Visual Studio Code again, I'm gonna go to extensions here, and something in extensions is called live share. As you see, live share is a real-time collaborative development, blah, blah, blah. This is gonna be useful if, as an instructor, I wanna collaborate with you or I wanna take over your screen in real time. So might as well install that. And when it comes to extensions, there's generally no harm in installing an extension. And you'll install different ones over time. People tend to like certain AI powered tools now that can predict some code for you. Those can be kind of not great while learning because they can know more than you, and often they're not exactly right. But ultimately, those are useful tools. So if we go here, we'll see that we should have live share installed as well. There we go. On Ubuntu, we have AutoPep 8. We have live share. Some other ones are live server. People like that one a lot. So we're going to install live server. And live server is another useful one. It's the sort of thing where I can say, maybe I'll close this and come back. So let's say I'm here. I could say something like example.html. Actually want to open that. So I'm going to say example.html. And then if I start typing HTML, what happens? Yeah, you get these little abbreviation things. So if I start typing HTML, I can hit enter there. Oh, I want to try the other one. I start typing HTML. I'm going to hit enter on HTML5. That's going to give me a very basic HTML page. And then maybe I'll just put something in there like, H1 hello world. And I want to see this, but I don't know how to set that up, right? So if I go back to, just do trust there. If I open up my command prompt and I start typing live server, I can say open with live server. It wants me to open a folder or a workspace, so that's fair. What we're going to do is we're going to close this down. It wants me basically to go up a level and then say code. Actually, here's what we'll do. I'm going to make a file called website, and then I'm going to move example.html into website. And then I'm going to say code website, and now that's going to open the whole folder. And you'll see that all that is in that folder is example.html. But now I could actually say live server open with server. And it's not making it so clear to me, but basically I can go here now and I can go to localhost, which represents, I don't want to do that again. I can go to localhost, which represents my own computer, and then it said it's on port 5500. So I hit enter, and now you can see we actually have a server hosted. I can click that file, and I actually see it. So that's a nice way to get a server set up. Not essential, but you probably will want that eventually. And I think from here, we're basically good. I'm trying